Very good. Now we're going to move on to getting spray to the target in cereals and oilseed crops. All the buzz. We're now going to welcome Tom Wolf to PEI. Tom is a spray application specialist based in Saskatoon. He grew up on a farm in Manitoba, studied agriculture at the University of Manitoba and Ohio State University with a PhD. Tom has 35 years of research experience in spray technology, starting with AFC in 1989. He's now a private consultant. He now, with Jason Devio, Tom now hosts and writes for the world #1 spray website, sprayers101.com. He's a past president and fellow of the Canadian Weed Society, Science Society, and has been named Distinguished Agrologist with the Saskatchewan Institute of Agrology. Welcome, Tom Wolf.
Thank you, Neil. Where's that little clicker? Well, it's great to be in PEI. Go Rink Smith, right? Is that what's happening? Do you know he, right? Yeah, do you know what happened this morning? I won't tell you. I'll just say Saskatchewan's now in sole possession of first place, okay? All right. Great to be here. This is my third trip to PEI, and I just love the discussion we just had because I was reminded of about 15, 20 years ago, I lived in New Zealand for 6 months, and I went to Mike Solari's farm and had lunch with him on a field day. He was the world record holder at that time, walked his fields, and wow, was there a lot of learning. And believe it or not, we had a field day. I worked for the Foundation of Arable Agriculture, which is the crop checkoff group down in New Zealand, in Lincoln, and we also did some work with Eric Watson. So I walked Eric Watson's field. I remember thinking one day when I was walking the field, you know how you always drag your hands through the wheat to sort of get a sense of what's in there? And I said, wow, that's wheat. I mean, that he could do something with that. And he ended up breaking the world record twice, his own. And then Chris Dennison came to Alberta, and he gave a talk on how to grow world record wheat. And he wants that world record back, by the way. So there's a competition going on. But you know what I learned from that, I'm an agronomist at heart, I'm not an engineer, was the 1,000 kernel weight that they had. I mean, what we heard this morning from Dennis was excellent, and all the right points there that I heard from those growers. But one of them was the TKW was really high. They used an English variety called Einstein. This isn't quite 20 years old. It's an older variety, but it has huge spikes and huge kernels. So they got more bang out of their heads per square meter than anybody else I've ever seen. And that could be very interesting. I wonder what these English varieties would do over here on the island here. I'm not sure if they could survive or not. But anyway, that's enough of that. We will talk about getting the spray to the target. One of the things I noticed on the slides just now is Kyle's passes over the field. I mean, not everybody put everything on their slides, but if I read that correctly, Kyle passed over that field 10 times, 4 times with foliar nutrition, top dressing or foliar, and 6 times with a fungicide, growth regulator, or 1 herbicide. And of course, it was the growth regulators and the fungicides that were the most critical part of that, because a competitive crop, of course, doesn't need a lot of help on the herbicide side. So that's what I thought. Well, thank goodness for that, because I'm not going to talk about herbicides today. I'm going to talk about fungicides. And I want to just acknowledge my co-author, Brian Caldwell. Brian Caldwell was my longtime business partner. He's just retired from the company, but a lot of the work that you're going to see today is work that he compiled with me. And I also want to mention sprayers101.com. I'm not sure if you're aware of that website. As a joke, you know, we put in the bio that it's the world's #1 sprayer website, and we're pretty sure that's correct, because we're pretty sure we're the only sprayer website. So. But it is a website made for you. It's a website where we write about things pertaining to sprays in all crops. Jason DeVoe is actually an Acadian. He actually grew up in New Brunswick and is now living in Guelph. He works at Omafra in Simcoe, Ontario, and he's my partner in the website. So I do encourage you to go to it and read about it, and it's there for you. It's not a commercial site. So the funding that we get is from producer groups like yourselves, and we use that money only for content development. We're not commercial in any way, so hopefully that gives us some credibility. The issue, of course, is that we have a crop that is growing, and it has a variety of different growth stages and targeting areas, and we have to identify those and figure out what happens. And the first thing we do is we try to figure out, okay, where does the spray go? And if you have a traditional spray that's vertically oriented, you might think, yes, it goes down through the canopy and hits even the weeds at the bottom of that sometimes dense canopy. That's not in fact the case. In fact, when you drive forward with a spray nozzle through a field, you're sweeping that spray cloud backwards. No matter what speed you go, it'll be swept backwards, and you will see a change in what happens. And the first thing that happens is the large droplets are swept back the least. And they're also the ones that are going the fastest. So they have momentum, they resist that forward movement, and they will therefore be going some kind of a vector, right? It's going to be ballistic, so they're going down and forwards. And the droplets at the back are the small droplets. They're the ones that are swept back, and you really have no control over them. They've lost their momentum. They've forgotten where they came from. They're just moving with ambient turbulence, basically. And so these front droplets, the closer they are to the nozzle, the more forward they're actually going to go, okay? Because they're still moving at the speed of the sprayer. And if you're going 10 or even more miles per hour, they're going that fast, and they haven't really slowed down. So if they hit something right away, like a wheat head, they're going to impact that thing from the side. Okay, they're not going to go past it, they're going to impact, because that's what it is. Further down, though, if your boom is higher, those large droplets have lost a lot of their forward momentum and have replaced it with downward momentum, just gravity and inertia. And that's what you see on these arrows. They're going slightly more vertical as I go down through that cloud. The back ones, you have no idea what they're going to do, in fact. There's no real way to control them. They're subject to buoyancy and turbulence and little things like that. So really not much you can do about them. So when we release large droplets into a broadleaf canopy, a lot of the time those large droplets are intercepted by the first target that they see, that they encounter. And that's often a leaf, and that leaf acts like an umbrella. And now underneath that leaf, you're not going to see large droplets, okay? Because they can't change direction. The only thing they might do is shatter or roll off and make their way down the canopy that way. Now, when we have a small droplet, it is subject to this turbulent effect that might occur, and they might change direction and move under leaves. They won't probably go on the underside of leaves, but they will certainly move to hidden areas that are not visible to the eye when you look down into the canopy. So that's important to know. So there is, I guess, some hope that these small droplets will go places where we need them, and therefore we like to produce small droplets. And so we decided to put that to the test with some empirical studies. So first of all, some of the published literature, and this is just really a scan I took of a document that I found from a sprayer nozzle manufacturer, actually. And these are their numbers that they put in. These are a little low, but they said correctly that if you have a small target, you don't need a lot of water volume. And I suppose that's right, but it depends to some degree on the herbicide mode of action and so on and so forth. You don't want to have a 5 gallon per acre spray for a contact herbicide that needs coverage, especially if you're doing a low drift nozzle. But nonetheless, that's what they're saying. And even for a grassy weed, they're saying, you don't need a lot more than that. And I would say that's not incorrect. Like in Western Canada, we rarely will go over 10 gallons per acre with a herbicide, but increasingly rarely will we go below that either, because we're tank mixing with more contacts to get resistant biotypes. So that's true for broadleaf as well. Now when we're going into a maturing, elongating cereal, it depends where we want to go with that spray. Do we want to go to the top? Are we protecting the flag, the penultimate leaf, at boot stage perhaps? So obviously the bottom of the canopy becomes slightly less interesting to us. Or are we covering the whole plant? And then if we cover the whole plant, we just simply have to add water. And the same for Fusarium T3 staging. Just going for the weed head, it's actually not that difficult to target. It's exposed. You can see it. If you hit it from the side, you'll probably hit it. The only thing in sway are really the awns, right? That is a formidable target. If you're going further down for the flag and penultimate, you add some water. And most of the time with the T3, there's still plenty of action there on the penultimate and flag for foliar protection, absolutely. But very rarely do we have to go all the way to the bottom with these. I mean, by this time, tan spot septoria, they're already up. They've already come up this way, so it's really close enough to harvest. So, and the same thing can be really said for the staging of the broadleaf crops. Also very similar kind of situations. The more leaves you need and the deeper you need to get in those leaves, the more water you should have. So let's test this. I want to do this in 4 different case studies, okay? So first of all, the main principles of a fungicide application are as follows. You have to know where that spray has to go. You have to understand where your disease is. So for Fusarium, it's obviously the spike. So that is your target, and that's where you have to go. For a canola, we're trying to probably control sclerotinia, so you're looking for flowers, petals, okay, maybe buds. Alfalfa, botrytis, other things like that, you just have to understand what the disease is that you're trying to control and where that spray has to go. Where are these targets in the canopy? Are they at the top, the middle, or the bottom? Very, very important to understand that, because that determines to a large degree how much effort you have to make to hit them. Okay? And the mode of action. And unfortunately, the mode of action of all of our fungicides, most of our fungicides, the triazoles, the strobilurins, are locally systemic. In other words, they don't really translocate within the plant. So you have to hit the part that you want to protect, and the best you can really hope for is to get some local translocation out of the leaf, like within the leaf, not out of the leaf, but within the leaf. They move in the xylem, in the water flow. At best, they'll move towards the tip of the leaf, but they will not move basally towards the apical meristem. They will not do that. So they're not truly systemic, they're locally systemic. That's true for most of our fungicides, and some aren't even systemic. If you look at some of the chlorothalonils and that, they don't move at all. They're completely protective. And a coarse spray is your starting point. A coarse spray, not a fine spray. I'll show you some evidence that the fine sprays showed no advantage to getting into the target or doing a good job with disease control. So coarse sprays are good. And I'm actually really pleased to be able to say that, because being able to spray fungicides or actually any crop protection agent with a coarse spray gives you timing opportunities. You can spray maybe into windier weather. I want to be risk neutral on this. I don't want to advocate spraying in the wind, but with a coarse spray, of course, you have the opportunity of spraying in some wind, and that gives you timing flexibility. And then choose your spray angle and volume accordingly to these principles, okay? So let's take example 1, chickpeas. You don't grow chickpeas out here. I know we hardly grow them in Saskatchewan anymore because they're so susceptible to ascochyta. And when we did grow about 1 million acres of them, they were sprayed 3 or 4 times per year, and there was just, should we keep investing money in this crop as it dies? It's a very virulent disease. So it's you target the leaves throughout the canopy and repeat applications. That's the situation. We did some work on this and did some work with conventional flat fans, some low drift flat fans, and some twin nozzles. Okay, you want to see, is droplet size important? And is fan angle, or the angle separating the forward and backward angle, are they important? We did 3 water volumes, 10, 20, and 30 gallons per acre, and we used a single research nozzle, and we just varied the travel speed when we did these different volumes. And then we did that in the field at about 10 site years with Sabina Benitza at the U of S, and we also did some work in the lab where we built a canopy, a complete canopy, maybe the size of one of these tables here, and put plants on it, and then we chose the middle plant out of the canopy and cut it up into these parts as I show here, okay? And these are some of the results. So there were 2 kinds of chickpeas, the Desis and the Cabulis in those days, and the Desis were fern type and the Cabulis were udifoliate. So the Desis formed a very dense canopy, and I call that a closed canopy. So you can see here on the closed canopy, there's really no statistical effect of the nozzle types as measured by the deposit on the leaves. Nothing going on, no effect of having a coarser spray, a twin spray, or a conventional flat fan. In the open canopy, it was similar, but surprisingly to us, it was usually the coarser spray that looked a little better than the finer sprays did, even though they were not significant. That was one consistency, is that was usually the tallest bar. This is an air-induced spray. That's actually good news. I always like that air-induced sprays do well, because I think promoting their use is good for the environment, it's good for us in terms of agronomy as well. On the open canopy, The volume did very little. In open canopy, the spray tends to get through it. So we saw really no trends with regards to increasing the water volume. But now watch this. This is the closed canopy. So this is where we had a really good stand, and we were seeing pretty significant effects of higher water volume. And that's really the takeaway from this one study, is that the denser the canopy, the more important it is to add that water. Okay, there's really no replacement for it. You're not going to get through that canopy with different droplet sizes, according to our data set. But water can do it. Okay, so very strong trend there. So nozzle type did not have a statistically significant effect on canopy penetration for these canopies, but volume did. It did not increase canopy penetration in the open canopy. It did, however, do it in the closed canopy and in all canopies. What we found was the more water we had, the greater the droplet density became, especially in the lower parts of the canopy, where coverage is most important to get and most difficult to get. Okay. The second example is going to be with canola. I know it's not a big canola growing region here, but that's our #1 oilseed crop. We've played with soybeans in Saskatchewan. We peaked at 800,000 acres, but cold falls prevented that from growing. In Manitoba peaked at about 3 million acres of soybeans. They're down to about 1.8 to 2. So it's a significant crop in Manitoba, has basically equivalent acres more or less to canola. So it's a very popular crop there. But it's quite different from soybeans, of course. The primary target here is the petal and the buds, and it's that they're at the top of the canopy. They maybe reach into the middle part of the canopy. And the secondary target would be the leaf axil. It's a saprophytic disease, sclerotinia. It feeds on dead plant material. That is the decaying petal. It lodges usually in the leaf axil and causes the infection there. So if you can protect that leaf axil with the fungicide spray, you're ahead of the game. So the staging is important here. You've got a window of maybe 3 or 4 days when the flowering is at about 30 to 50% flowering. You're starting to get petal drop, and you have to get your spray on before that. We used fine and coarse sprays, and we used them at 2 pressures. So a conventional flat fan at 40 and 80, and then an air induction flat fan also at 40 and 80. 5 site years with Randy Kuchar, who was at that time with Agriculture Canada. He was a colleague of mine, and we did that work together, funded by the Canola Council. And here are the results. If we look at the y-axis, that's incidence of stem rot, of sclerotinia. And if you look at the first sets of bars, those are the fine sprays for 2 fungicides. Here are the coarse sprays for 2 fungicides. And here is the bar for a very fine spray, a hollow cone, actually. It was flat. There was no significant difference in the performance of these fungicides. The fungicides themselves were different from each other, but the way in which we applied those fungicides was in fact not. And we were disappointed. We thought we would be able to give somebody an inside track, so to speak, on applying their fungicide better, but we couldn't. We maybe thought a higher pressure was a little better, because the higher pressure did help the atomization, it helped the patternation, and so on and so forth. We then also went to the lab and we partitioned those sprays out, and we measured the amount of deposit on the leaves and the stems, and this is the result we got. And there was really no difference between the way we applied it either. And importantly, when we went to the petals and buds, which was our primary target, we saw no significant difference in the partitioning of that spray. So even the coarser sprays deposited on the relatively small petals and buds. So we felt that to phrase it in a positive way for our clients, we said, I find it good news that you don't have to spray fungicides with a fine spray, because it gives you that timing flexibility to get the spray on at the right time for that crop, as I said already. So nozzle type, no statistically significant effect. Pressure, maybe. And, the hollow cones, not at all, surprisingly. And there's a bit of a movement, I have to say. I mean, there are voices in Western Canada that advocate for the use of very fine sprays at very low water volumes. It's off-label, of course, not recommended. But I was fortunate to be able to see that we could debunk that as a movement, because I think it's bad for agriculture. to be frank. The third example is peas. And again, not soybeans, but they're an important pulse crop for us, several million acres in Western Canada. We target leaves and stem, lots of disease issues in there, typically lower in the canopy. So we will look for the spray deeper down. And we did some work out at just east of Humboldt, about half an hour's drive. And we did that in conjunction with PAMI and with CASE. And we borrowed a nice pea field from a farmer, Chris Bauer, and he was kind enough to let us put tracks in it. So we sprayed with 3 different kinds of sprays. They were not very different in their droplet size, so we didn't see a statistical effect of that because we didn't actually look for that. But we did have 3 water volumes. So we had 5 gallons per acre, 10 gallons per acre, and 15 gallons per acre, and these images are water-sensitive paper from the top of that canopy. Okay, so lots of coverage, actually, even at 5 gallons, I would say adequate coverage, right? As soon as we went down into the middle of the canopy, though, we had the attenuation that the foliage typically presents, and that is that's visible here. So significantly fewer drops, and lower in the canopy, we started to have barely any drops. So you can see that the coverage really struggled. Yes?
The same nozzle, the same pressure?
Yes, these images are all same nozzle, same pressure. That's correct. Yeah, we had a PWM style. We had an air assist style, and then we had a conventional style. And these are all from the conventional because the 3 different application methods weren't that different in droplet size. Yeah. We then also did some counting and looked at deposit numbers per square centimeter. So we saw that the deposit number, which is, I think, a very important determinant of fungicide activity because of their inability to translocate that well, you have to have coverage, was good. And we drew a line here at 80, which is sort of a suggestion by Syngenta that good fungicide coverage is about 80 droplets per square centimeter. And you can see the 5 gallons obviously didn't do it. We also went a little further. We looked at the numbers again for the 3 different heights, and you can see the 5 gallons may have passed at the top of the canopy, but not at all below. Adding water significantly increased that, and adding some more water enhanced particularly the middle and perhaps the bottom, not so much. But you have a greater probability of getting spray into that canopy. In just a few other studies that we did in the lab, this was funded by the Western Grains Research Foundation, we looked at the boom height. Because boom height is, as you'll see in a few minutes, very important for fusarium. For broadleaf canopies, the boom height was in fact not important. Okay, so we saw similar deposits at the top of the canopy with a high and low boom, or I guess it was low and high boom, left to right, and then very similar results further down in the canopy. So boom height didn't seem to matter. As I said, it will matter for wheat. Water volume, again in the broadleaf, this one did matter, but it was deceiving. At the top of the canopy, when you correct for the fact that we're doing 3 different water volumes, the amount of active ingredient we found at the top of the canopy was very similar. And at the bottom, it actually also looked very similar. But when you do the math on it, you'll see that the increase in water volume at the top of the canopy is in fact just 10%, just like we suspect. It's basically 4 divided by 39 times 100. But at the bottom of the canopy, it's a 100% increase. We doubled the deposit. We doubled it. So it's not a bad outcome. Okay? So that's corrected for water volume. That's active ingredient. And so that's 10 minus 5 divided by 5, right? That's the math we did there. I think it looks like nothing's happening, but it's actually very, very important what's happening. And that's because more water is more droplets. The probability of getting droplets down there and the importance of those droplets in terms of covering that target is just immense. And so we want to go there. Spray pressure. A very common belief is that higher pressure forces the spray more into the canopy. And we have done some work with lasers and measured the droplet velocities of droplets coming at different pressures into the canopy. And so we wanted to actually get some empirical data on this. And we found that, at the low pressure here, these are the deposits here in the upper, middle, and bottom of the canopy. And at higher pressure, we had really not much more, or basically the same thing. And at even higher pressure, we had no change. Why is that? Why does pressure not do what we think it should be doing? The main reason is that the larger drops that are, that are fairly easy for the canopy to catch because they're very ballistic, they impact on the leaf and they more or less stay there. They don't need any help with pressure. They're already going fast. They have momentum. Whereas the small droplets, they need help. And so when we increase their velocity by adding pressure, we think that they're going to get further into the canopy, and they don't, because they lose that velocity almost immediately. Because when you're driving 5 or 10 or even 15 miles per hour through your fields, the air resistance that those small droplets experience on leaving the nozzle is immense, and they slow down to their terminal velocity within a few centimeters. So almost upon leaving the nozzle and going behind in that cloud that we showed earlier, they're no longer moving down. They're moving more horizontal than anything, and you can't actually accelerate them with pressure. So you're not forcing the spray into the canopy. So it's a common myth, I guess, that you can do this. It does make the spray finer, and that could have some value. So the main lessons, single or twin fans, there's no disadvantage to using twin fans, and they might have some value in some situations, absolutely. And you may have them on your sprayer already. So I'm not speaking against twin fans, I'm just saying they don't appear to be critical in this situation. There is no advantage for finer sprays. We've done, 4 fully funded studies, always looking at droplet size. We've never found droplet size to have a major impact on the fungicide efficacy. Very surprising. We even brought some of our trials to other contributors. We worked with a group in Manitoba on potatoes and asked them to look at some desiccation of potatoes with some of the coarser nozzles. And they said the coarser nozzles work just as well as the finer nozzles, which actually, to be quite honest, surprised us. Slower speeds do give you better canopy penetration. I don't have a direct evidence of this, but in one of our studies where I said we used the same nozzle, we just moved slower and slower to achieve the higher water volumes, the benefit of that increase in water volume was partially due to the slow travel speed, and I can't tell you what proportion that was. But I think that's an important contributor to the increased performance, slower travel speeds. You have less effect of moving the small droplets out of the plume. You have less effect. They stay within the plume. They might benefit from some air assistance that the larger droplets provide, and you can have that benefit.
Could I ask, since you worked with Pam a little bit, any variation in your nozzle width that you've worked with? You have 16 or 20? Any closer spacings, observations of nozzle spacing?
Okay, to repeat the question, did I do any work with closer nozzle spacing than 20 inches? So say 10 inches. We'd have done work with 10-inch nozzle spacing. In fact, as part of the study that I just am not showing the data, the 10-inch nozzle spacing has never, in our studies, shown a benefit in terms of canopy penetration. I've not seen it. I'm not saying it's bad, though, because what it does give you is greater latitude for boom sway without losing your pattern uniformity. It does give you that. And of course, the nozzle manufacturers are really happy about it as well. So we often read labels and say, all right, how do we get the canopy penetration or coverage that we need? And the label is really not very useful. It usually talks in qualitative terms like, you need complete uniform coverage. And what is that exactly? And I try to quantify it a little bit by showing you the 80 droplets per square centimeter, or maybe 5 or 10% coverage. Can you do that? Yes, you can. Okay? I've shown lots of pictures of this water-sensitive paper, and you can buy this. And if you haven't already got this paper, it's from TJet or Spot On. Okay? It's about $50 a package, depending, plus or minus, depending if you catch it on sale. It contains 50 1-inch by 3-inch, that's what you want, 1-inch by 3-inch pieces of paper. And if you put that on in a canopy and put a spray over top of it, the droplets turn blue. Okay? And then you can actually download an app. And this one's called SnapCard. It's made in Australia, funded by the GRDC, their local checkoff. And it's great. And if anybody wants to see it during the break, I have it in my pocket. I'll show it to you. What you basically do is take a picture of your water-sensitive paper. You decide if it's a good enough picture, and then you drag these handles on the right side here to the area of interest, right? Just with your fingers on a smartphone. And then you say go, and it gives you the coverage number. And right here you can see the coverage number, right? So that's 6.6%, and that's done. And you can save it, show it to someone if you need to, as a confirmation of the quality of the work you might have done, and so on and so forth. And you can do statistics on it. I mean, you can do this in replicated ways, and you have a hard number. Okay, so it's an easy thing to do. You can go further into this. You can get proper scanners and proper analysis where they count the droplets. That'll put you hundreds of dollars in. So some of you may be interested in that, but not everyone. Let's finish off by going to fusarium. Now, fusarium, obviously a huge problem here last year. And thank you, Margaret and Heather, for mentioning that to me and preparing me for this talk. And I do want to mention a few things that we did with fusarium. And I think tomorrow or Friday, I think, Art will also talk about fusarium somewhat, and we've already compared notes on that. So your target is the weed head, but your secondary target can be the upper photosynthesizing leaves, okay? This, by the way, is Eric Watson's wheat. Okay, this is the wheat in New Zealand I walked through. I took a picture of it because I thought, okay, that sucker could yield. Angled nozzles are good. I'll show you some evidence. Wider angles are better. I'll show you the evidence. Coarser sprays are better, surprisingly again. I'll show you the evidence. Low booms are better, absolutely. And actually, faster travel speeds are okay. They are, in fact, okay. Let's start with the first one. Angle nozzles forward or double them. And so this is the work we did. We took a wheat head and we sprayed it and then measured how much deposited on both sides, the leading and the trailing side of that wheat head. Okay, it was actually an artificial wheat head, so we could wash it properly. We made a single pass, and then we looked at the front and the back side of that wheat head. And that's what we found. So the back side of the wheat head receives droplets even though it's a vertically oriented nozzle, and that's just wrap around to the fine droplets. So that happens. It's aerodynamics. So we said, all right, that's the split. 2/3, 1/3, here's the lines. Let's see if we can improve this. So we did a double nozzle, and this was because of the work of Art and Dave Hooker and Helmut Spicer at Ridgetown, okay? And also the work at NDSU. And we did a double nozzle and found that the front nozzle now deposits slightly less. Why? Because it's got half the volume, because we also put more volume out the back. It still deposits some in the lee. The backward-facing nozzle puts some on the front, but the majority on the back. Okay, so that is the whole basis for this twin nozzle, where we can now increase the deposit and also cover the back side of the wheat head. Why? Because the group 3 fungicides that you're likely using for FHB do not translocate to the other side of the wheat head on their own accord. They're locally systemic. You have to actually hit the other side of the wheat head if you want to protect it. Hopefully Art will speak some more about that tomorrow. Greater angles are better. So we did some work with a 30-degree separation. This is now at 10 miles an hour. This is air-induced, indicated by the dashes. And we found this to be the case. So even though it was double, we didn't actually have good uniform distribution. Now we're also going faster. And then we went, so we drew a line here, then we went and did the wide angle, 120-degree separation. So 60 forward, 60 backwards. Also air-induced. So of course. And look at that. That's the front nozzle, that's the back nozzle on the front and back side. And the increase was significant. So a wider separation is good. It's very good. And in fact, in Richmond, I don't want to steal Art's thunder, but they even went more radical in their angle. They went almost completely horizontal with the turbo floods. Use coarse sprays. Why? Why would you use coarse sprays here? Well, the target is large. The wheat head is large. And it's not difficult to hit. You are probably going to use more than 10 gallons per acre, so you have adequate coverage. There's no attenuation of that spray by the canopy. It's exposed. And if you want the trajectory of that droplet to be forward or backward, the larger the drop, the more it'll stay. It will keep moving in that direction. That's very key. So that's the reason you want coarse sprays. So we went to a fine spray here, wide fan angle separating, and this is the deposit we got. And just for record, I mean, it's all different. We did this over different days and different replicates, so there was different. So we always used the same benchmark side by side, though. And then immediately following this, we went with a coarse spray, same fan angle, same travel speed, 10 miles an hour. And look at the increase in the deposit, particularly on the front side. The front nozzle does the majority of the lifting, and it does better when you angle more. This led to much other work. You know, changing the amount of volume emitted through the front versus the rear nozzle and that kind of thing. And finally, maintain low boom height. So this is very important. So we did a single nozzle in this case, and we did 3 boom heights, 30, 18, and 12-inch boom heights. So 12 is admittedly very low. But this is the deposit we got with fine, medium, and coarse sprays. And then when we lowered the boom, we got this deposit. When we lowered the boom some more, we got that deposit. And look at the improvement. First of all, the trend of having greater deposition with coarser sprays because they retain their trajectory longer is held true. And secondly, the improvement between the lowest and the highest boom height was over twofold in terms of deposit number. Okay, so that was absolutely key. So angle nozzles, yes. Wider angles, please. Coarser sprays, absolutely. Low booms, And I said, faster is okay. Only this time, no. Why? Because the front nozzle's doing the heavy lifting, and you're helping the front nozzle. The back nozzle's struggling. It's perplexing, but I would say the benefit of keeping really slow to help the back nozzle is likely not as great as just helping the front nozzle do a better job. So it leads to some disuniformity, but I hope it's not a huge deal. But I want to close with some perspective, okay? And the perspective is this. Fusarium head blight struggles because it's a virulent disease that doesn't have a lot of good resistant germplasm in your hands, okay? And our fungicides, even Miravis Pro, are rated for suppression only. You're not going to turn suppression into control with application method because the deck is stacked against you. So let's just keep that in mind. Focus on the timing, focus on making it as efficacious as you possibly can, and do the application method absolutely, but don't miss your application window. Not for that. Okay, water volume is more important than droplet size. Almost in all of our studies, even in the herbicide world, that's almost true. Twin fan nozzles may be helpful, particularly for fusarium. Invest in logistics. What's the best selling productivity improvement in Western Canada? What sprayer? It's not a sprayer. It's a tender truck, selling like hotcakes. Keep your sprayer. Buy a better way of delivering water to that sprayer so you don't have to drive home with it. Make your booms fold faster. Anything to give you logistics, because that's acres per hour. You can't buy a sprayer big enough that'll offset the logistical improvement that you get from a good tender system. And it results basically in better agronomy, right? Timing. And then finally, I mean, I would really recommend that everybody should get a packet of water-sensitive paper and use it because you'll learn a lot and you'll document a lot. Spurs 101 is yours. It belongs to you as farmers. Jason and I write on it. We have fun with it. And we did a video on drones. We'll talk about drones tonight. We did a video on drones. All of them are embarrassing to me because I'm uncomfortable on camera, but we did a deep dive and just said, let's go for it. And yeah, enjoy that. So I'm available for questions if there's time left to have any.
I got one question here. You had just one of the later slides you had.
Sorry, can you repeat
Sure.
that?
One of the later slides you had, the latest slide you had a better coverage on lower boom heights. You said better coverage at 12-inch versus 20-inch. But wouldn't you jeopardize uniformity if you do that? Like,
would you be jeopardizing uniformity if you had the lower boom heights? Yeah, absolutely, you could be. So this was a study of principle, and we just wanted to see if we do this. I fully agree. Now, we angle those nozzles 45 degrees forward, so the trajectory in the fan was probably near, like, I don't know the geometry of that would be, but it was certainly more than 12. It's probably 18 inches, which is sufficient for a good overlap of a 110-degree nozzle, so I think it's possible. But the real issue is this, right? You have no room to move on a boom sway, and that is perhaps, maybe, I would say, one of the most important considerations in owning a sprayer is how stable those booms in fact are, and will they let you do the things that are beneficial? Yeah, good question though, thank you. Yes?
So with your studies and your experience, what would you recommend yourself for spraying for Fusarium head blight, for example, in wheat and barley and whatnot, for gallons per acre and speed? We have varying thoughts on this all over the place. Potatoes, we push 20, 25 gallons per acre, right, in our regular weekly spraying. Some even go higher than that. I hear you showing here down to 5. You've tested 5, 10, 15. Do you have a general area? Because, of course, the less gallons, the more acres we can get over, and efficiency and timing, that all comes into it. But is there a feeling of a balance there as to where that's at?
I promise to answer your question if you promise to ask Art the same question on Friday. Okay?
Okay.
Because I know he will have some comments on this. Okay? From our perspective, like, I honestly do not know how fast you wind up your sprayers in Prince Edward Island or Atlantic Canada, for that matter. Can you maybe give me a little hint about how fast you might drive with a fungicide application?
Of course, that varies on the operator, too.
And I know it might be, but what's your best
our guys
guess?
are pushing 10 to 12 miles an hour easy enough on our farm.
Okay.
I know other guys that'll tell me they're at 15 to 20 miles an hour,
Right.
in real smooth
Of
fields
course.
like that. So
Yep.
I guess I'm curious as to what your guys' thoughts are on where both fits, the gallons per acre and the speed.
Yes. So I would say for a T3 fungicide in cereals, we should be at least at 12 gallons and possibly at 15 gallons. Okay? I see very little evidence that in our situation in the West, where maybe we aren't growing those kinds of yields that you are here, that there's very little evidence that there's benefit to having more water for us. If your canopy is as dense as I see it in some of these yield trials here, I would say higher water volume may be appropriate. Travel speed, I am trying to get my farmers to not exceed 15 miles per hour. In a cereal fungicide situation, if we're doing good yields and we have, we don't want to necessarily go through that field that fast anyways. So I would say 10 to 12 is acceptable. I don't see a need to go slower than that. We did our trials at 10, we didn't go faster, and we didn't see a disadvantage of going faster, to be quite honest. That's one of the reasons I left the window open for that. The cereal canopy is not that hard to get the spray down to. So I'd say you have a bit of an opportunity there.
I'll ask another question in your experience, because you're doing a lot of this stuff. We've been researching the idea of the automatic booms to help the sprayer operators do a better job of keeping a more even height. Is there a lot of that going on in what you're seeing in your areas?
I would say that the ability to maintain a level boom should be the number one criteria for any new purchase decision on a sprayer. That's how important I see that as being. It's the most neglected capability of sprayers. It is probably the most fundamental to the success of a spray operation. Many of my customers' booms are 30 inches off the target because they experience excessive sway. And I don't think that's acceptable. And if a machine's going to cost what they cost, and I know what they cost, then the least we can get is plus or minus 4 inches on the outer edge of the boom on the height. That's the least we can expect. It's not, frankly, it is not rocket science. It can be done.
Yeah, and further to that comment is even older sprayers, from my research lately, is you can do upgrades to it. It's not cheap, but it's not near the cost of going and trading your sprayer for a new one. So
Fully agree.
there's options.
Yeah, I fully agree. So I have one client who is a custom operator in the Peace River region of Alberta, and he does about 40,000 acres a year with his sprayer. He's currently got 700,000 acres on a 4830 that he bought 10 years ago. He puts a new boom on every 4 years. It's an aluminum boom. It's a wear item, obviously. And he has never exchanged a wheel motor. His 2630 went on him, and it was a horrible experience for him because he wants to do 1 million acres with that, and now the records are gone. So he says the chassis, the drivetrain on these sprayers will last you. And the wear components can be replaced. It's the most modular piece of farm equipment that we have. I spoke to, we were at a Spray Smart event in Ontario a month ago. There was a fellow over from the UK, Ian Robertson. He said they bought a used sprayer for their farm, owned by Sir Dyson, the vacuum cleaner, Sir, largest farmer in the UK. He works on his farm, used with 6,000 hours on it. He said it was fine.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tom.
Okay.
One more
quick
question.
question.
Niles,
One more
over
question.
here.
Just one quick question.
I was looking at the time. Sorry.
You're out of time, but you get a little more. Just a quick question on pressure and changing your speed. When you slow down on your headlands, make your turn, you get lined up, and you speed up again in the variable rate. What's a reasonable pressure running? If you have a big field and you can get a little bit faster, and your nozzle, what's the limitations of your nozzles? I run just a coarse air induction nozzle, flat fan, generally for a lot of my spraying. So 40 PSI is kind of what I target, but if I want to go a little quicker, I'm not even close to these 10 mile an hour speeds. How high can I go and have good spray job done?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you do really have to look at the spray quality charts for your nozzle. Identify the nozzle, go to the manufacturer's tables, and see what the effective speed or pressure is on the spray quality.
Yeah, like on this nozzle specifically, I think it says the operating range from 30 to, I think, 90 PSI.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
normal?
Yeah, that's
As
normal.
long as you're in that range, that's all right?
That's right.
Okay.
So below 30, your pattern will be too narrow, and you'll have overlap issues and patternation issues that we talked about, the boom height issue, but that's that. It's also maybe too coarse. 90 is a reasonable maximum. The nozzles will, in fact, perform well at 120 to 150 PSI. They get finer, of course. They don't get too finer, but you'll blow something before you go that high.
Yeah.
But they can, in fact, the nozzles themselves can, in fact, do that. And the only thing that I'm seeing in Western Canada is that the vast majority of new sprayer sales are PWM. So the pressure question is no longer an issue for those people anyways. But yeah, absolutely use that nozzle. Aim for 60 on average, gives you room to slow down and speed up in both directions. That's very important. If you are going, say, 10 miles an hour and you need to slow to 8 or 6, your pressure, if you're at 40, your pressure will be 20 before you know it.
Yeah,
and then you're suboptimal.
Yeah, okay,
right?
that's the other thing
Yeah.
I have to watch.
So go a little higher to give you that downward movement room. That's more important than the upward movement room. Thank you. Yeah.
Just one more quick question, just take an opportunity you have in here about a particular nozzle, a newer nozzle from Syngenta, 3D90. What would be your opinion on using that for contact fungicide in potatoes, in particular when you're concerned about drift? But my second question goes with it. We wouldn't have pulse modulation, so I don't know if you really need that to come to the full extent of that nozzle.
Okay, the 3D90 is a new nozzle from Syngenta. It's manufactured by Hypro for Syngenta. Some of you may know the 3D nozzle. The 3D was the original angled nozzle that was introduced maybe 5 years ago developed again by Syngenta. It's for a herbicide in the UK for blackgrass. And it's made its way over here. The original 3D is too fine. I haven't even recommended it, even though it's a bestseller, not because of me. Because it's too fine. The 3D90 addresses that issue. So now that is a 90% drift reducing nozzle. I haven't received samples because they aren't actually in Western Canada yet, but it is quite coarse. So this is one nozzle where you may overshoot the mark. So this is a nozzle specifically made for Europe so that it makes it legal for certain pesticides to be applied that are restricted to a 90% reduction nozzle. It's a big market for nozzle manufacturers. It's like the dicamba nozzles were for the soybean extended max trait. So I would say yes, but with higher pressures. I don't think you should use that nozzle without having tested it at just 40 psi. Probably it's going to want 50 or 60 psi just to moderate that large droplet that you're now producing.
And the second question was too, would you need pulse modulation with that?
No.
Or, no.
No. It just happens to be pulse width modulation compatible, but you can use it without it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good nozzle. Okay.
Any other questions?
Now I think, yeah.
Appreciate it.